This program is made possible in part by the Maryland Arts Council through the State of Maryland and the National Endowment for the Arts and the Howard County Arts Council through a grant from Howard County government.
Hello, welcome to Hoko Polizzo's The Writing Life. My name is Michael Durda. I'm a weekly book columnist for the Washington Post. It's my pleasure to be speaking today with Genet Seaver. Genet Seaver is the editor of her late husband Richard Seaver's memoir, The Tender Hour of Twilight, subtitled Paris in the 50s, New York in the 60s, the Golden Age of Publishing. For the next few minutes, we'll be talking about some of the writers that Richard Seaver and to some degree Genet Seaver worked with over the course of their career. Genet, it's a great pleasure to have you here today.
I'm delighted to be here.
First of all, let's begin in Paris, since that's where everything really should begin.
Yes.
How did you meet Richard Seaver, who would affect your life so dramatically? You were going to be a violinist.
I was, and I was a student at
You
that
were
point.
you were a violinist.
I was. And on my last, I was at the Conservatoire at that point, and mutual friends. It was a Christmas Eve we met, and I actually ran through a concert that I was supposed to give a couple of weeks later. So there he was sitting, and I was playing Mozart and whatever. And as they say, the rest is history.
Dick was in France to
He was in
research-
France to pursue his PhD at the Sorbonne on Joyce.
So a French PhD. No?
Yes, a doctorat ès lettres. And he was also involved in a literary magazine. And he was recalled by the U.S. Navy. He had hoped that the Navy would forget him. Not a chance. The papers arrived and off we went. It was fine because I just got my big award at the conservatory and I'd also been invited and received a wonderful grant at the Juilliard School of Music with one of the great masters of the time called Ivan Galamian. So it kind of worked out okay. I went to Juilliard and he went to the Navy. And we were supposed to go back to France right away, but 3 children later, we're still here.
In France, he had been part of this Merlin group of young expatriates living in Paris who got to know a number of the famous writers of the time and published them in their magazine, Merlin, which was contemporary with the Paris Review.
In fact, it predated the Paris Review. I remember I was dating Dick at the time when the Paris Review brigade landed in Paris. They were all tall and good-looking and Harvard graduates and feeling on top of the world, all of them.
Did Merlin, I mean...
and the Merlin was totally poor, completely broke, and...
So they envied George Plimpton.
You know what you do when you envy someone, you become very arrogant. They were thinking the Paris Review were playboys, and their magazine was a social moment that wouldn't last. 40 years later, it's still...
They were serious artists.
They were serious, committed.
Well, what were some of the who were some of the writers that Merlin published that Dick was involved with in those early Paris days? Ionesco, the Romanian playwright.
The playwright, Sartre, Samuel Beckett. I can't think of right this second. Oh, yes, there was, interestingly, Dick had met Sartre, who had read...
What was that like?
Well, it was quite extraordinary because the man was very generous and very intelligent, and he wanted Dick to come, and Dick arrived with his co-publisher of Merlin, who couldn't speak any French, so Dick was carrying on the conversation, and Sartre didn't speak English, although he read. He didn't converse in. And so he said to Dick, "Is there anything we could do together?" And Dick said, "That would be my great honor, of course." So at that time, Sartre had published, for the first time after the war, the very first testimony about the concentration camp. It had never appeared anywhere. No one had come. I mean, this was long before Elie Wiesel, La Nuit, etc.
Right.
This was an account of a Hungarian doctor who, because he was a doctor, he was recruited in Auschwitz by Mengele to work in his infamous laboratory. And he survived to tell the tale. And I don't know how Sartre got hold of it, but he had it translated into French. And those were the first testimonies. And it was very, very powerful. You have to...
So this was published in Merlin then?
It was published in Merlin.
Ah.
And subsequently, Dick translated the whole book from the French, not from the Hungarian, and published it in America, and it's still in print today.
Wow.
That's just a little anecdote.
Well, Dick is best known as a great champion of Beckett, having helped discover his work. But he had some, as I recall, kind of run-in with Simone de Beauvoir over
yes,
Beckett.
what happened is Beckett sent to L'État Moderne a novella, sorry.
L'État Moderne is the
It's
magazine.
the magazine that Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre were publishing to great acclaim. They published one part of Beckett's short story, or novella, if you wish, and refused. And then they said, Simone herself wrote a note to Beckett saying, "We're not going to publish the second piece. We're not in the habit of publishing sequels." And Beckett was very offended, and he said, "This is not a sequel, this is the story." So there was a frisson, shall we say, between the two, yeah.
I mean, Beckett today has this character of being almost a kind of saintly person, being very reclusive, very much focused on his work. And you met him?
Not only did I meet him, but he became a close friend.
Was he in fact like this image?
He was so nice, and so, first of all, he was a gentleman. Manners were impeccable, never a minute late, always properly attired, and he was a wonderful bon vivant. Of course, if you gave him a glass of Irish whiskey, things went so much better.
Really?
He was funny, and Dick made him laugh a great deal, and we laughed a great deal. And he came to my mother's home, and I remember our son at the time was 11. He was in Trinity School in New York, and he and Sam played chess on the balcony after lunch, Sunday lunch. And of course, Alex, my son, didn't know who Beckett was, just a friend of the family. I think 2 or 3 years later, of course, they started teaching Beckett, and he said, "Oh my goodness, this is a big, tall guy I played chess with. I'm not sure I was up to it." No, we were very close. In fact, I discovered 18 more letters that Sam wrote to me.
Wow.
That are quite wonderful with his beautiful...
I remember reading one of the biographies and toward the end of his life when he was in a nursing home.
Yeah.
But he would still feed the birds, and he would bend down and sort of give the birds.
Yes.
He was sort of courtly gestures.
That's exactly true.
And what was you also knew Jean Genet?
Genet was
who was a
totally
a famous
different animal.
famous sort of character as having been a criminal and having led a very louche kind of life.
You know, he wasn't really. When he was orphan, and foster home, he hung out in the wrong crowd, and I think he was arrested for nothing, for stealing bicycle and doing stupid, low-life things of no human serious consequence. Be that as it may, he was in prison, and he started writing, as you know, and the intelligentsia got hold of some of his writing. I don't remember exactly how. And they all got together and made him...
Well, I know Sartre wrote this huge volume
yes,
about...
Saint-Genet.
Yes.
Oh, yes. And he was considered a very, very big, important writer. Now, when Grove published Genet's plays, many of them. Balcon, I won't go down the list. Barney and Dick wanted to invite...
This is Barney Rossett.
Barney Rossett, the publisher of Grove. Dick was the second in command. They invited Genet to come and see one of his productions. There were two at the time on Broadway. And here's the story. Genet, little Genet, went to the American Embassy and applied for a visa, which was given him. He goes back, he always lived in a hotel. He never owned anything. So he goes back to the hotel, and the phone rings, and someone very polite at the American Embassy says, "Terribly sorry, sir," I guess in French, because Genet couldn't speak English. "We made a mistake. We're not really granting you a visa. Could you kindly bring it back?" Well, Genet flew into a rage and said, "Absolutely not. If you want my visa, you come and fetch it." They did, of course. This is some years ago. So several years later, when Esquire magazine hired, as Dick says, in a moment of mad journalism, William Burroughs,
author of Naked Lunch.
Author of Naked Lunch, Terry Southern.
Co-author of Candy.
Among many others, that's right. Allen Ginsberg, poet, American poet of the time, and Jean Genet.
So they brought Jean Genet over from France.
They were bringing Jean Genet. And Genet said, "I will not go unless Dick and Genet are with me as my interpreters." And Esquire agreed and paid for our hotel, and were very...
So they took you to...
So, of course he couldn't come. He had no...
Ah.
America would not let him in. So we scratched him off the Esquire reporting. And Dick and I and our children are on vacation. This is August, I guess. And I get a phone call. "Allô, ici Jean." "Ah, how are you, Jean? Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in America." Little devil understood that with a French passport, you can go to Canada. You don't need any okay. So he got to Montreal, and he knew that if he went to campus, somebody would recognize him. And they did. And "Monsieur Genet, how nice to see you. What can I do for you?" "Well, you can drive me over the border."
So he sneaked into the United States.
He sneaked in. And Dick said, "This is, on the one hand, good news. On the other hand, terrible news. We're going to Chicago with high security. Police all over the
1968
Democratic Convention. We'll all be arrested. You'll be deported. This is madness on top of madness." And Jean said, "Not to worry. Nothing will happen to me." Okay, so we go to Chicago. And it's true. Nobody frisked him. Nobody, of course, recognized him. And we were in the heat of being gassed and chased by the police. And it was quite an amazing...
Well, I mean, it's always struck me as an astonishing panoply of writers. Plus, there's your guide for Esquire later became a famous writer himself.
I know, exactly.
This is John Berendt.
John Berendt,
wrote Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
He was a charming...
He must have been 25 or something?
He was, and he was so nice and excited by it all, by being with these...
But you were chased. We
were chased like bandits, like everybody else was chased in Chicago. The protesters, that is. Yeah, and I have a little piece, may I?
Please.
If I can find it. No, that's Naked Lunch. Yeah. The year 1968. Again, having no alternative, dawned on a note of mingled hope and despair. The turbulent 1960s were winding to a close, or so it seemed. In fact, the worst or best, depending on your viewpoint and political bent, was yet to come. The United States was still bogged down in Vietnam. What had earlier been termed JFK's war was now Lyndon Johnson's, and that albatross was weighing even more heavily round his thick Texas neck. Quagmire abroad was matched by increasing resistance to that pointless, hopeless war at home. It was an election year, and the mood in the country did not seem to bode well for the incumbent. Taking political advantage of the nation's growing winter of discontent, Voices of opposition were gathering political strength as the primaries began. One man in particular, the senator from Minnesota, Eugene McCarthy, surrounded by a band of exuberant youthful cohorts, was focusing on the folly of the Vietnam War, in particular, and to judge by the polls, gaining in popularity week by week. In a stroke of journalistic brilliance or madness, Esquire magazine, sensing that the Democratic Convention in Chicago might well be a historic event, invited 3 world-famous writers, all published by or associated with Grove, to cover the convention. The satirist Terry Southern, author of The Magic Christian, the author most capable of handling frenzy, says Esquire. William Burroughs, author of The Naked Lunch, the nightmarish work that had propelled him to the North African expatriate drug scene, to the New York Times bestsellerdom. And Jean Genet, playwright, novelist, ex-convict, and homosexual, author of 2 banned works we had recently published in the United States, Our Lady of the Flowers and A Thief's Journal. A man dubbed by the Senate Department as undesirable, and as we have seen by the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre as Saint Genet. I won't go on too much. But Genet was fascinated not by the political aspect of the convention so much as by the uniform of the police force. He was mesmerized by the tight-fitting pants and the blue helmets. And we stayed, of course, in the same hotel.
A very gay perspective, so to speak.
Very much so. And he would write during the night his piece, and every morning during the convention, he would knock at our door at 6 o'clock in the morning in his little kimono. May I come in and read you my piece? We weren't terribly thrilled, but he did. So he climbed right into our bed.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
shamelessly, and read his piece. But he was a very interesting, erudite, extremely erudite guy. We could speak music, art. He was extraordinary.
Well, this book also is, to talk a little more directly about this memoir, is very erudite and charming and full of wonderful anecdotes and little allusions. For example, the passage you read earlier about the dawn having no alternative is a clear reference to the beginning of one of Beckett's novels.
That's right.
The
I'm
sun,
glad you said
the sun
that.
having no alternative.
Good for you, because
but
Dick
there are
said,
all these little touches
Dick
that
would
occur.
be very pleased to hear you say that, because when he handed me the pages, or when he finished the book, he said, there's a lot of it's peppered with a lot of Beckettianism.
Yes.
And I don't know how many will pick that up. Well, you're the one.
Well, what was it like to edit this manuscript? There must have been difficult both emotionally.
It was. However, during the time that Dick wrote, he would pass pages to me and say, "What do you think? What do you think?" And he said, "It's going to be too long, much too long. I'm going to beg you to edit it down." Which, when he died, I had 950 pages on his desk. And as an editor, and at this point a life partner, it was pretty tricky to make the right decisions, but I tried to be as much an editor as I could and not a lover or a wife or a participant.
Were there any parts of it that surprised you, or were these things you knew?
No. But I had to take a great delight, and Farrar Straus, the American publisher, had said to me, do whatever you want, it's too long and we'll put that in your good hands. But remember, we are more interested in the literary itinerary, trajectory, than personal, which in a way I regret, because he had a lot of wonderful personal
not famous friends necessarily.
Not famous, no. That didn't.
Well, there are plenty of famous friends on the back. I know the endorsements from John Irving and the poet and critic Richard Howard, and all sorts of an introduction by the wonderful writer James Salter, who was a mutual friend of ours.
Yes, of course.
And did you spend most of your social life in New York with other people in writing and publishing?
Oh yes, we had a very lively salon, shall we say, or dinner table for years.
Did you in fact, go have many dinners? Were you a sociable couple?
Very much so. I don't like to admit it, but yes, yes.
Now, I know you've written cookbooks, so you
I
became
have
an
as
expert
well.
on
Well, one of the
cuisine.
literary agents said to me, Genet, you work all day as a publisher, and you give these amazing dinners, and you have no staff, no help. Will you share the secrets? And that was Lynn Nesbitt, who's a wonderful
Oh, yes, a famous agent.
And I, inspired by her, I started to write and gave her the manuscript. And she said she read it overnight, sent it directly to Bob Gottlieb, who was then the head of Knopf, and the rest, etc. Yeah.
Did Dick ever regret working at Grove Press, where there was
No, they were the most, I think the most...
Because they were so controversial, I thought, well, maybe he would like to spend a quiet day at Knopf.
We kept saying...
where there was no
we
trouble.
kept saying we're praying for one dull day. but the fact is, I even found a paragraph in his book, I've forgotten, every day was exciting, in a good or bad way. Either you had to confront the courts, or a complaint, or fight with an author, or not fight with an agent. And and Barney was, of course, the source of incredible daily Sturm und Drang. I mean, he was a big drama person. So you had to deal with Barney and the rest of the way. No, he loved it. He said never a dull day.
Did he have any particular favorite writers or books of all those that he was involved with?
Well, Beckett, of course.
Well.
Beckett was his god. Yes, when he discovered Hubert Selby,
Last Exit to Brooklyn.
which really shook him, he thought this is, and of all the brouhaha made about certain writers, he felt then that Selby's work would become a very important, if not
I
part
remember he was a close friend of a writer I was fond of, Gilbert Sorrentino.
Oh, yes.
And who they'd grown up together,
That's
I
right,
think.
that's
and
right, exactly.
They were both controversial writers
Yes, of
in some
course.
ways. And
I think Sorrentino even
I think he worked at
published-
Grove
he
for a
worked at
while.
Grove, that's
Editor
right.
for a bit.
That's right.
And so what were the offices at Grove like when?
Well, they changed, When Dick went first, it was on University Place on top of a supermarket. And it was crowded and bustling, and phones were ringing all the time. There was no order. It was really exciting, actually. And then they moved, and the final move, they got bigger, so they got bigger space. And when Barney made the regrettable mistake of going into movies, and he did on his own. And
well, you did have that I Am Curious Yellow, which was
Yes.
such the famously erotic movie of the time.
I know, and he made a great deal of money. Grove did for that, and so Barney decided this is the time to bring Grove to a proper abode. So he had this wonderful building on Mercer Street with thousands and thousands of dollars of restoration, repair, and modernization. He even had a private elevator.
Wow.
And from 12 people, it grew to 200.
Oh, gosh.
And he didn't know the name of half the people, and it was time to, and they went broke, as it were.
How did you come to work in publishing yourself? Because I know you did become an editor.
I was carrying,
Was it at Grove or later on?
No, it was later on. I was a concert violinist, and I went along the road as such, traveling, because if you are a soloist, you travel. Your agent books you here, there, and everywhere. And at the time of our third child birth, I decided I wasn't going to continue to go away from those I lived for. It just seemed a big contradiction to me. And at that point, Dick invited me into publishing and taught me the ropes for a great many months. In fact, it was the same time as Jackie O started her career as publishing. The two of us were like little students.
You know each other?
Yes, we were both at Viking. We were both writing notes, understanding none of us understood anything. It was very sweet.
So this is when Dick had left Grove to
Yes.
work for Viking. He had his own imprint
Correct.
there, Richard Seaver Books.
That's
and,
right.
And
And I remember saying, and I'd never worked in an office. It was foreign animal to me, or territory. And I would, and in a foreign language, remember, at that time.
Yeah,
And I said to Dick, what do I do? What do I do? And he said, be poised. If somebody asks you a question, Say, I'll get back to you tomorrow, and write down, and we'll go over it tonight. We did. It's the same with Jackie O. She was lost.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did you decide to start your own company, Arcade?
Dick was then the CEO of Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston.
Uh-huh.
And he was approached by one of the big guns at Time Life. They owned Little Brown and Company. And they wanted Dick to be the president of Little Brown. Dick thought he liked their list very much. He thought that was a good idea. And then interestingly, the same man who interviewed and wooed Dick said, after all, I want to be the president. So we'll give you your own avenue, you and Genet. So that's how it started. So we went and joined, and it was a honeymoon, except they were then bought by Time Warner.
Oh.
And that it became a corporation. And Dick, luckily, had in the contract a possibility for us to do a buyout. So we did. 3 years into it, we became independent. That's how.
Well, that was a time, you were lucky in that regard that it was publishing's golden age, where there were independent publishers. There was a lot less corporate interference with the books
it has
and
changed
advances.
Very much. Yeah.
And there was that, people published books because they loved them or believed in them, not
Exactly.
just because they thought they would make money.
That's so
And
true.
it's still true somewhat, but not as much as it used to be.
No.
Do you miss publishing?
I'm still in
You're
publishing.
still in publishing?
Oh, yes. After Dick died, I closed the house down, and then a publisher, a brand new guy on the block named Skyhorse, his name is Tony.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Bought my backlist, and I'm now back into it.
I see. So
I buy books, I edit them,
so you're working for Skyhorse is your company these days?
Yeah, Arcade
Yeah.
has a separate catalog,
Okay.
but is under Skyhorse, yes.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So you're continuing the tradition.
Yes, indeed, in a smaller way.
Have any of your children shown interest in
They're all
books or publishing?
avid readers, but no, I think they saw a struggle for so many years. I don't know, I'm surmising. One son is in the financial world, and the other one is actually doing something idealistic. He's running an educational academy with a meditation center, etc., in Thailand. And the third one is like we are, liberal, dreamers, broke half the time, but charming.
Well, very charming indeed. It's really been a great pleasure talking with you about
For me too.
about The Tender Hour of Twilight, about these incredible writers that you and your husband have known.
Nourished our
and,
lives, yeah.
I think a lot of people would envy you the chance just to have been part of this world and have accomplished so much good in promoting, writers who might otherwise have been overlooked or neglected or actually banned. But Grove made a great difference, and
Indeed, I
and
agree.
Dick and Genet Seaver made that difference possible too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Genet. It's been wonderful talking to you about Dick Seaver's memoir, The Tender Hour of
I'm so
Twilight.
happy you invited me. I'm so happy to meet you, because I admire your writing, and for me it's a great
Thank you.
pleasure.
Well, thank you. And thank you for watching this latest installment of Hoko Politzo's The Writing Life. I'm Michael Durda. I've been talking with Genet Seaver, who is the editor of her late husband Richard Seaver's memoir, The Tender Hour of Twilight.